Hello, this is just after 12, and since we have almost 50 people online already, I thought we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is the October event on Building Sustainable Exhibits hosted by the American Alliance of Museums, Environment, and Climate Network. I am Joyce Lee, the chair of the network, and so glad that you are joining us today. For those of you who do not yet know us, we are the AAM network with expertise in environment, stewardship, sustainability, and climate action. We also represent thought leadership, global thinking, advocacy, and excellence. So on the heels of Climate Week in September, when you may have joined our international event, we would like to tell you another exciting virtual symposium created for COP26 honoring the Paris Agreement. When heads of state meet in Glasgow, as you have probably seen on TV. On November 2nd, we will have a unique view into the Arctic Circle when museum leaders and scholars there tell us the pace of climate change today. We will share the registration link with you on the chat, and the symposium is called On the Frontline, Arctic Museums and Climate Change. And for AAM museum members, we also have a green coffee hour on January 27th. If you're interested, please contact Leslie, Tom, or myself. Today will be a content-rich panel, and please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. But if you would like to tell us where you're from, please do so in the chat box now. We love building this community. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Doug Flandreau, who is an experienced museum architect at Cambridge 7 in Boston. He's also serving on our Sustainability Excellence Award Committee. Thank you very much, Doug, for putting this together and all the panelists who are available today. Over to you, Doug.
Thank you, Joyce. I am excited to speak with you today. We have a large panel of people who are going to be talking to us about building sustainable exhibits. When we were thinking about this, I just thought about all of my friends and colleagues that I work with who are great at this, and I called them up and asked them to participate with us. Sumi Fasolo will be talking about exhibit construction and interior finishes. She works with me here at Cambridge 7. Also, Suzanne Barbati will be speaking to us about some great salvage work that they've done at their museum, salvage and reuse work. And all these people I'll introduce again as they speak, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what we're going to be covering. Elizabeth Hummel from Image4 will be speaking to us about sustainable graphic production and for graphic panels and other graphics and exhibits. Yanis Kaboulis and Ryan Poe will be speaking to us about low energy media technology. And right before them, Glenn Schrum will be speaking to us about lighting, low energy lighting, and things to think about, tips and tricks for when you're lighting your exhibits to build sustainable exhibits. Like Joyce said, we'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, put it in the question and answer, and we'll try to address those at the end. But also, if you have some things that you're doing at your museum that you would like to share with us, we want this to be a conversation. If you could add that to the chat as well. As we go through with each of our topics, we'll recommend some products. If you have some products that have worked well for you, please share that in the chat as well. As we start this, let's see, let me click on the three categories when we're talking about building sustainable exhibits for interior finishes and construction of the actual exhibits themselves are designed for deconstruction, seeking out salvaged and recycled materials, and avoiding materials with toxic chemicals and materials that do harm to others. So the toxic chemicals that we're speaking about in this third category can be toxic chemicals that are actually in the product. They can also be used in the manufacturing process. For example, PVC uses asbestos in the production, And this is killing people who live near the factories, usually in the southern US. And this usually negatively impacts poor communities. And often these are communities of color. So this is really an environmental justice issue. And we are trying to eliminate PVC as much as we can from our exhibits. We should also look for a replacement for all vinyl used in exhibits. For example, paper wall murals or direct print fabric murals can be a good substitute for vinyl murals. And then as we look for designing for deconstruction, we try to find ways where we're okay with seeing the screws in the exhibits. Is basically, we talk about clips and screws, not nails or glues. This is a detail shot of a large donor panel wall that we did at the Roundhouse Aquarium in Manhattan Beach, California. And they had 3 large panels with the donors for each year on this big wall. And when we did the renovation, we put in this donor panel. So each fish represents 1 donor. It was a large school of fish. And we used the screw, this is a security screw, as the eye of the fish to make it so they could just replace each donor as needed instead of throwing away the entire panel. And so have you done any design that you've designed for deconstruction? Do you have a story you could tell us? If so, please share in the chat. And I'd like to invite Suzanne to turn on her camera and talk to us a little bit if she can. This is these images here are from an exhibit at the Oh Wow Science Center in Youngstown, Ohio. Suzanne?
Yes, hi, Doug. I'm learning so much already. Thank you for sharing that information, and thanks for having me here today.
Could you tell us a little bit about the image on the bottom here is the gift shop, and I know that these the shelves were used from the previous incarnation of the souvenir shop, and also the signage on the wall that was exterior signage. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And so what happened was, due to COVID, we moved a construction project up with the help of Cambridge 7, and found that we didn't have the funding, the complete funding to do everything we wanted to do. So we made some adjustments. The shop here being one. All of the shelving you see on the left-hand side was shelving that we had originally. We repainted it and hung it on the wall in the souvenir shop. So, and originally it came from one of the local libraries. So it was really a great example of reuse and recycle. The signage above that shelving was our original outdoor signage. And because the construction project was actually a reconfiguration of our first floor entrance. And we moved it from one side of the building to a central square plaza side of the building. So it's much more iconic and much more visible in the downtown Youngstown area. And we reuse these things mostly because we were trying to save money. But I'm excited to hear that it's part of a larger effort, and I'm looking at it quite a bit differently today than I did when we were in the midst of it. The House of Shine wall that you see in the top left-hand corner is an exhibit that actually we copied or borrowed in partnership with the House of Shine Museum in Dallas, Texas. So this idea came from them. This is every one of these items on the Shine wall represents something that we love or individuals love, and reminds them of something that in their lives that they feel very strongly about. So those are all items that have been collected either from the community, from the House of Shine folks in Texas, and you can see that there's still room for more. So it's all about celebrating the shine in your life.
And these are all objects that you asked your visit, well, not all of them, but many of them were objects that you asked your visitors to bring in from home, and they were essentially salvage items that you used as part of this collage. Is that right?
Yes. For instance, the traffic light you see there came from the city of Youngstown. So we did encourage folks to share, and as you know, you got to ask multiple times for things like that, but we continue to to gather items and what do we call them? Artifacts for the House of Shine wall. The other thing we did that you don't see here is we kept our original visitor's desk, admission desk, and we repurposed it for a new exhibit called microelectronics. Rather than demoing it and rebuilding something else on the other side, it's worked out really great. So it really was a financial consideration originally, but it's much more than that.
So this is a great example of how building sustainable exhibits can be cost effective, and so that's great. Thank you, Suzanne. I really appreciate you being here with us today. And
not always cost effective at the end of the day, but right. that was the goal originally.
It can take more labor, especially in organization, storage of materials, but it can be a way to save some money if done. Yeah, I mean. It was great. It was great, and it was great working with Cambridge 7. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Just a couple other items on this slide. Things to think about is some museums work with theaters in the area or movie sets to talk to them about when they're going to be striking their sets, and they can get a lot of their raw materials from there. Doors Unhinged is a company out of Philly that collects commercial doors and resells them after they've been demoed from a project. So those are just some interesting places you can go for salvage materials, and I think that is definitely growing in the construction industry and building construction. You'll see more and more of that in the years to come. We're going to talk quickly about some interior finishes. This talks about paints when you're painting an exhibit. Things to look for are low VOCs. There's a VOC content to look for, which people are kind of used to. There's a newer thing in the newer version of LEED that looks at the emissions evaluation. So you want to make sure that it has the California Department of Public Health standard method emissions evaluation. That's what you look for when you're selecting paints. For paints, you want to look for 50 gallons per liter of VOC content as a maximum after tinting, because the tinting can also add more VOC content. And these are some third-party certifications, especially this MPI-X green performance standard. That does not only low VOC, but also high performance. So that's a great third-party certification. And here's a list of many products that we use. The Sherwin-Williams ProMar 200 Zero VOC is one we often use because it's pretty cost competitive. For interior stains and clear finishes, again, you want to look for that California Department of Public Health standard emissions evaluation. For these, the VOC content is usually a little higher. Sometimes you can find them lower, but the maximum limit we look for here is 275 gallons per liter. And then GreenGuard Gold is a great third-party certification and if it's GreenGuard Gold, it will have had the California Department of Public Health emissions evaluation. And here's some good products that we use listed here. For metal finish, when you're painting metal, if you can get away with it, latex is a really good option. What you want to avoid, if possible, are epoxy or industrial coatings. They often have a lot of toxic chemicals in them. The latex paints are easy to apply and also easy to retouch, but maybe not as durable as they need to be for high touch areas. With the high touch areas, we try to powder coat. Powder coating is a finish on metal that is really durable and uses very little energy to apply compared to liquid coatings, but they're only shop applied, and so they're not easily touched up. For MDF Plywood and particle board, you just want to look for a third-party certification. Especially the one to look for is this CARB rating, and it'll say CARB ULEF, which means ultra low emitting formaldehyde, or NAF. The thing about this is sometimes they're really good about using tricky language here that say they're made with soy-based binders or something like that. And sometimes one layer will have, or two layers will have that, but the rest of them don't. So it actually has formaldehyde in it. So you really want to look for this third-party certifications for plywood and MDF. And you also want to look for FSC, which has to do more with sustainable harvesting of the wood. All right, I'm going to turn the slides over to Sumi, who will talk to us about polished concrete flooring.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you, Douglas. I'll continue on with some recommendations for interior finishes and exhibit spaces. We used polished concrete flooring for this exhibit at the Heifer International headquarters in Little Rock, Arkansas. Polished concrete systems will create a densified top surface that requires no coatings to keep a high shine. The most sustainable finished surface is a no finish surface. And next we'll look at carpet. And so in the next slide, Doug, are you able to switch slides? Oop, there you go. When carpet is selected for exhibits, look for modular carpeting over broadloom so that highly worn areas can be replaced without replacing the carpet and the entire space. Look for carpets that are low emitting and have low life cycle global warming impact. There are many good options that have CRI Green Label Plus or Cradle to Cradle version 3.1, silver or higher. NSF 140 platinum ratings, or are certified with the Living Product Challenge. So many good options there. The resilient flooring, this is an example of a dynamic rubber floor that we designed for the Museum of Discovery and Science in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. These tiles slowly transitioned color palettes in each gallery space and were designed to be replaced as needed and the long lifespan of the exhibit. So similar to carpet tile, it's great to make sure you have an attic stock that you keep in storage and so that it's available when you need it. When specifying resilient floors, look for low emitting linoleum or natural rubber flooring. To minimize a negative environmental justice impact, avoid selecting VCT or luxury vinyl tile because the manufacturing plants for vinyl tend to be located in lower income communities. This is what Douglas was discussing earlier in the presentation. So linoleum or natural rubber flooring are a good way to go. With wood or tile flooring, so perhaps less common for exhibit renovations are wood or tile floors, as they can be more expensive to install and require careful attention to acoustics. This wood floor will be installed in an exterior kiosk on Cape Cod that is pursuing the Living Building Challenge core certification, and the wood is FSC certified. For wood floors, choose pre-finished bamboo or FSC solid wood floors instead of laminated floor products. Ceramic tiles made in some foreign countries have toxic glazes that can contain heavy metals, so watch out for that. Some tiles can contain filler from crushed up cathode ray televisions, which contain toxic materials. So a good way to go is with US manufactured tiles. USA regulations are more strict for ceramic tiles, and there's less transportation involved, which means less embodied carbon. Countertops, we recommend avoiding solid surface countertops unless it's a curved surface. And the reason for avoiding solid surfaces is because they're almost exclusively virgin plastic with no recycled content. Stone countertops that are NSC 373 certified ensures that child or slave labor was not used to extract the material. Engineered stone can contain high recycled content. Look for low emitting materials with certifications that ensure no toxic materials. Ceramic tiles or wood can also be good options for exhibit millwork or work surfaces. And when it comes to textiles, they're often used for upholstery, on furniture, on banquettes, wall barriers, or even with graphics. A lot of graphics can be printed directly on fabric. There are several third-party certifications that ensure low-emitting or non-toxic fibers. GOTS ensures high levels of organic content for natural fibers. OECO-TEX 100 ensures no toxic fibers or dyes. Try to avoid applied antimicrobial or flame retardants. These have been proven to be toxic. And currently there are new laws that are being put into place prohibiting the use of certain types of flame retardants. So that's something your local jurisdiction or your state is beginning to enforce into laws. Stain treatments are made with chemicals of concern that have been linked to infertility, kidney and testicular cancer, and other health problems. And they don't break down in the environment. These chemicals have been causing problems for generations. We have recently learned that all natural fibers or all synthetic fibers are relatively easy to shred and recycle, but mixed natural and synthetic fibers in fabrics are rarely recycled. So something to keep in mind is going for all natural fibers or all synthetic fibers for recycling. Back to you, Douglas.
Great, thank you, Sumi. This is just a quick list of some great resources when you're looking for sustainable materials. I wanted to point out quickly the last two. If you're really looking at embodied carbon or your global warming footprint, your carbon footprint, these are two great websites. They're free. The last one, the Stitch website, is made just for museums. So that's a great one to look at if you're comparing two different objects or if you want to do a carbon footprint of your whole exhibit. So what are some great exhibit finish solutions that you have come upon? If you have some other ones to share with us, please share that in the chat. And then I'm going to turn the slides over to Elizabeth to talk to us about some graphics. Graphic solutions.
Thanks, Douglas. Yep.
Great.
Thanks, Douglas. And will you, sorry, are you advancing the slides or do I have that now?
Yes, I will.
Okay, very good. So thanks so much. Because the conversation around this is so rich, I just posted a couple of do's and don'ts over to the chat room, and that might inspire some questions later for the Q&A. So basically, I love the context that being environmentally aware and friendly is also sometimes the economic solution. It's one of the joys of reuse. And we have 30 plus years working through that fine balance between reuse and virgin materials while trying to walk the best option for the planet and the people. If you could pop ahead, thank you.
Sorry, got it.
Perfect. Yep. So we're going to cover 3 different types of materials, and each of them are kind of have their own issues when you're doing a material selection. Part of the reason why is that graphics in general require a more highly engineered closed loop system than, let's say, specifying a flooring or a countertop. Literally, the inks just don't stick to certain materials, or they stick to the materials in a way that affects the overall durability or outcome. So the consideration for being environmentally sound with the in the case of graphic is also a durability question. So it's a really interesting line to walk. So on the next slide, I'm going to walk through a couple of the different options that we tend to work through here. So we categorize them as kind of rollable, rigid, and found materials. So rollable materials have some great green credentials because their carbon footprint is generally smaller. They took less space to get into the printer's facility, and they take up less space when moving out to your job site. They also have the advantage that often they can be stripped off of a donor substrate, and it makes graphic changes both easier and more economical because you don't have to disassemble large portions of your exhibit to update content, which is a great combination of being economical and being environmentally aware at the same time. The disadvantages, though, is that we have a preference environmentally to choose paper-based and natural materials like fabrics. Paper-based wall coverings are available, and canvases can be used as large wall murals or smaller content. But some of the problem-solving materials like vinyls and PVCs, there isn't a really good recyclable alternative for these. I've listed a couple in the following pages, which you can look at in greater detail when the slides are over. So here's a couple of our favorites. Yeah, let's just flick on through. Basically, moving on to the rigid materials, I love the corrugated materials that are lighter weight. They are available in both cardboard or paper-based, as well as aluminums. The great advantage of that is obviously you're avoiding the entire PVC conundrum that Douglas was speaking of. And you are also able to easily strip or replace those. Additionally, if you go with a paper-based material or a wood, you have the advantage of not having to have the board pre-coated. So that means you don't need to paint the board, or the board doesn't necessarily need to be coated to receive ink. A couple of other things that we like to work with, some of our favorites for wall murals. We love a paper product that's produced locally called Monadnock Envy. It's made in a socially responsible factory that's partly water powered here in New Hampshire. And it's an uncoated stock. It prints beautifully. It also strips beautifully, and it even has a version that comes with a strippable adhesive. So you can use it as a temporary graphic replacement in lieu of a virgin vinyl material. Obviously, we've talked about artist's canvas. Great solution for a rigid panel. And then we kind of wander into the other side of the environmentally friendly specification. And those are materials that are incredibly durable. So actually, can you back up one more? Yeah, hang here for a moment, Doug. So these would be panels like glass, and specifically we print on a material called Gorilla Glass, which is incredibly impact resistant. So if you know that you have a high touch, high contact, maybe it requires even a high level of cleaning area, you don't want a material where the cleaners are going to wear out the substrate before the end of its content life. You want to use something durable like that. And then lastly, there are some PVC alternatives out there. Again, you'll see some additional notes in there. You can pop over to the next slide. A question I get asked really often is, what about printing on, and then they list a new ink technology. The big one I wanted to get across is that you do have control over inks, but not in the way that you expected. So the control you have over inks is not that you can specify a particular kind of ink, because a lot of the graphic systems, the warranties are linked to what's called a closed loop system. So the ink has to go with a particular machine, has to go with a particular material, and that particular material goes to the particular other companion adhesive. So that chain you can't easily interrupt without voiding a warranty, which is really problematic if you should have a product failure in the future. So what you can instead do is look for printing that doesn't use solvents. So this could be called non-solvent printing. It could be called water-based printing. It does mean that you're going to have to seal the graphic or treat the graphic in many situations. UV curing is another option, but the solvent printing, not only does it off-gas often in the environment, but the VOC levels within the facility that makes it can be incredibly high. And there's been a great deal of documentation that this is really difficult for workers. So try to specify non-VOC, low VOC inks. And okay, we'll flip ahead here. And flip ahead over that one as well. Lastly, I'm going to leave you with, let's plan on designing with the end in mind. If you know this graphic is going to last for 25 years and the content is going to be there for 25 years, put it under glass, put it on a material that is going to take the abuse of 25 years worth of wear and tear. If you know that this is a museum content that's going to swap every 18 to 24 months, or maybe it's something that it's going to receive a lot of impact and it's just not possible to put something durable in there, really look at how you're going to remove and replace. As it was said earlier, using a screw or a fastener is an obvious, easy one, but some of the other options can be having a panel where the graphic can easily be stripped off without removing from the wall, so you don't have to ship a panel back or drive a panel across town to have it replaced. Another option would be looking at using some of the materials that are emerging, like the strippable paper-based wall covering that are vinyl replacements. So what sort of materials have you installed in your museum space and wished that you had gone with a different selection? Maybe throw that out in the chat or the Q&As for later on. And next slide, please. And we'll skip over that one. And basically, this is our team. If you have a question, reach out to me. I know we've been a little short of time and we've had some technology adventures, but certainly reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you come up with something. We love working on challenging pieces. And back to you, Douglas.
Great. I'm going to turn the time over to Glenn to talk to us about some lighting. Before I turn it over to him, I just wanted to go over some really low-hanging fruit for lighting. That if you haven't replaced your halogen and incandescent bulbs with LED, you should do it right now. It will pay for itself in energy use reduction. And there's often government grants available to help you with that initial cost. And then this is the RoHS is something to look for lighting and AV equipment. It's a stamp that's put on by in Europe. It certifies that there's no hazardous substances in the actual fixture. So that's something to look for as you're selecting equipment. Glenn is going to talk to us a little bit more about this. I just wanted to introduce the concept of EUI, which is energy use intensity. And this is just a way of measuring how much energy your equipment is using in your exhibit. We have this spreadsheet. This is a tool that we've developed where you can plug in your different lighting equipment and plug in there's something called the LPD, which just measures the amount of equipment and watts total that you're used. And the EUI is a little bit more fine-grained. It looks at how often you're using each of those equipment. So if you have work lights that are only on 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, this accounts for that. And essentially, you can figure out a budget for an EUI budget for your exhibit. We can talk more about that if we have some time at the end, or if you'd like to just shoot me an email at exhibits@cambridge7.com. I'm happy to plug in your lighting schedule from a recent project or a future project and help you look at the EUI and answer those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Glenn and the slides over for him to discuss low energy lighting in exhibits.
Thank you, Douglas. As Douglas mentioned, I'm going to focus on energy use as a topic of sustainability with lighting, but I do want to emphasize that the other sustainability issues that have been raised in the presentation apply, being mindful of the embodied energy associated with products and the work conditions and chemical conditions that are requirement or that are implied in the manufacturing. So with lighting, I want to start with daylight, which is a readily available resource. So in terms of energy use, there's an assumption that it's going to have lower energy use. An issue with daylight that is really critical that extends to electric light that I'll talk about a bit more is that in exhibit spaces in museums, what we're primarily concerned about is the visitor's eye and their ability to see the exhibits and the artifacts and the elements in the museum space. And so the adaptation of their eye from being adapted to a very bright space to a darker space takes some time, and can also, if their eye is adapted to need higher light levels in order to see, and then you can have to use more energy use to compensate for that. So daylighting is a big culprit here because daylight levels vary so dramatically, and the high end of daylight is very high in terms of the quantity of light. So a very important consideration is always, when incorporating daylight into museum spaces, is the eye adaptation across the visitor sequence. Another element that varies by museum application, but so critical, is to be mindful of direct light coming from daylight systems. That direct light is much higher light level than what you would typically have from an electric light system. So it can cause the eye, again, to adjust and have the electric light areas appear darker. The distribution, which is the pattern of light coming from daylight, is really important. The image on the left shows a project that we did at the Hauser and Wirth Gallery in Los Angeles, where we introduced a fully diffuse daylighting system, which allows all corners of the room to be illuminated and has a really soft, low light adaptation sort of scenario. Next slide, Douglas. So electric lighting systems are really what we want to think about here in terms of energy use, is to use no more electric light than is needed. Again, the human eye as our primary focus of attention in exhibit in museum environments is incredibly flexible. We can read a book under the light from a single candle if our eye's been adapted to those light levels. So the ability to lower light levels to no more light than is required and no more energy use than is required is a goal that you should have with electric lighting systems. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you achieve that dimming. But the other issue with no more light than you need is to be mindful of where you have light and where you have shadow. So we call this term distribution, which is different than intensity. So if we think about the pattern of light and shadow, this gets at the approaches that might be used in museums to focus light on a wall display. Like in the image you see on the slide right now, there's a focus light on the mural that's on the left side of the image. And then you can see the relatively lower light levels on the floor adjacent to it. So we're focusing light where we want the light to be and then using less light elsewhere. So intentional use of light distribution. Douglas mentioned this EUI metric, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, other than to say that the typical code required lighting energy metric is lighting power density. And that takes into consideration all potential lighting loads that could be used at any given time. So it's a worst case scenario of all the lights being on. Whereas this energy use intensity metric takes into consideration time, so dimming and lower usage over time, which is a much more appropriate way to measure museum electric lighting usage and allows for dimming to really be integral in how you think about energy usage in lighting systems. Next slide, please. So lighting controls are what we use to dim electric light fixtures. And broadly speaking, we have different ways to integrate dimming. There are local dimmers, which might be a group of lights that are on a single wall dimmer. We don't typically use that in museum environments because it would require someone to intentionally set the light level to that of that one group of fixtures to what we would want. So often we use centralized dimming systems. And this is where you can potentially gain a lot of energy savings, but it requires a high level of coordination and integration to make them work. These centralized dimming systems are programmed in order to work the way that you want them to work. So they become very user-friendly once they're programmed, but getting through the process of design, coordination, and programming represents a potential hidden cost. So if you have an intention of using a centralized dimming system in the museum, and then you want to make sure that you're looking out for the outcome of that system being only as good as the process that gets you there. So if that kind of a process isn't something you can reasonably or realistically manage, and then there's a much more straightforward way to save energy in museum environments, which is to have integral dimming at the light fixtures. This is something that wasn't available before LED equipment, but now it is. So you can, at each fixture, control the output of the light to be no more than you want it to be. And then you just turn all of your exhibit spaces on or off on a timer, and you get the full benefit of energy savings. Next slide, please. So I want to wrap this up by saying energy usage savings in lighting is really about integration. It's about thinking about how the human eye sees, which is a complex system that includes not only how much light is delivered to an object, but it's really how much light bounces off of that object back into our eye. So we need to think about lighting when you're making decisions about finishes. As you make decisions about finishes, you're really making decisions about lighting requirements. And this image, which was a project we collaborated with Cambridge 7 on at the Roundhouse Aquarium, is an example of the integration of lighting displays and the ambient light that comes from wall displays. So in this space, we limited the amount of direct light on in this area because we had the illuminated displays and providing light. And so thinking about these two systems, which aren't often thought about at the same time, those are some of the ways that you might gain some energy efficiency. And with that, I will hand it over to Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just turn the time over to Yanis Kaboulis and Ryan Poe from Electrosonic, who are going to be talking about sustainable exhibit technology.
Thank you for having us here today. We're going to be looking at outlining a few concepts around sustainable AV solutions. I'm Yanis Kaboulis, Director of Technology of Innovation, and my colleague Ryan Poe, Director of Technology Solutions. And let's start with our slide on planning and designing. Audio, visual, and control systems are often thought of as boxes that consume energy and dissipate it. How can you avoid that? You might ask how you can find a way so that your next time AV deployment promotes sustainability. Well, we want to think of AV topology and deployment as an approach in a multidisciplinary way that goes beyond just the AV. We need to look at the designed infrastructure, which in turn touches all deployed low voltage solution systems, including security, surveillance, access, acoustics even, lighting, just like Glenn spoke of earlier. We call this approach internally as technology master planning. And as we look for solutions in the future based on technology trends, we plan and can design to a budget, or as Glenn hinted, power allowance goals. We took this type of approach to our design during our consulting effort for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In that project, the allowance between lighting and AV was 16 watts per square foot. I recently visited a new site where a refresh was required on what was already installed, but at the same time, new demands for more immersive and personalized experience required additional technology to be integrated and deployed. We felt that this was a perfect opportunity to engage the visitor's own smartphones while supplying those without one with a loaner. At the same time, instead of duplicating efforts, data was shared between AV, building management system, and access control. This approach checked out many boxes in terms of functionality, including multi-language support, while fulfilling some ADA requirements of setting processing and other AV hardware, and therefore power consumption. Ryan?
Thanks, Yanis. Now we'll look at some considerations regarding the technology vendors and hardware that are used in building sustainable exhibits. One common pitfall we see is to use devices that have an energy rating that are designed for residential use. Those devices can actually end up being less energy efficient than their commercial grade counterparts. So often to achieve that rating, they are designed to turn off automatically after a period of time. And this can be great at home if you forget to turn off your TV, but it can create a really poor user experience at a museum that's open all day. So what ends up happening is those energy saving settings get turned off and then the TV stays on all day. And then to compound that issue, those consumer TVs aren't designed to be on for extended periods of time, and they end up failing sooner than intended and need to be replaced. So a better approach would be to use a commercial grade display that has robust communication capabilities. And then what we can do is creative things like turn the display on and off based on proximity. And that allows us to reduce energy, but also deliver that good user experience. And then another thing we look for is not just the products, but the vendors, making sure that they're invested in green initiatives. So we'll pay attention to the materials that they use and whether or not they have goals to be carbon neutral. And then there are a handful of compliances that can be used to gauge a company's commitment, such as RoHS and REACH. And to determine a manufacturer's stance, oftentimes the best thing to do is just go to their website. They'll have some sort of environmental statement, and that's a good place to start. And then, Giannis, I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, those were some very good points. Let's look at the system architecture a little bit. I spoke earlier of integration and sharing of data with adjacent platforms. In the past, terminology such as computer vision, geofencing, or LiDARs were part of manufacturing and quality control automation, but now security surveillance and access control utilizes them. Integration of such technologies using the interoperability protocols under what we know as Internet of Things, that's the IoT, can deliver greater sets of functionality and drive experiences to a higher level. Just like proximity or occupancy sensors in lighting or building management systems would dim off or turn off, actually lights or HVAC dampers in non-occupied spaces, these more advanced sensors I spoke of can provide a lot more meaningful data, which we can then integrate in the AV deployed solutions. Doing so delivers a better experience, but to our context, building sustainable exhibits, it offsets hardware, sensor duplication, which means less power consumed, less heat dissipated, fewer service calls, and most importantly, less e-waste when you replace parts that have been damaged. How many times have we had to place actually a PC with amplifiers and interfaces at kiosk locations, then managing it from an EER at the far end. Fast networks and edge computing allows us to optimize the media data at the far end and therefore host the main servers in a cluster at either the facility or even a completely remote location, which is optimized, an IT environment. Improving the HVAC demands just at the far location instead of everywhere in the building. For those of you not familiar with edge computing, an example is how you watch YouTube. Your favorite music video can be played at your phone, your laptop, your smart TV app. The content is always the same, served from afar, but it's optimized at the far end by the device viewed upon. Ryan, it's back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, now we'll dig a little deeper into displays and content. So there's a number of different display technologies on the market, such as edge-lit LED, where LEDs are placed along the edge of the LCD panel. And then the light from those LEDs bounces off a reflective surface and illuminates the entire LCD panel. This is the most common display technology that's available today. It uses very little power. However, the image brightness is not always perfectly even across the entire display. So that's fine for individual displays, but if you have a bunch of displays tiled together to make a video wall, that unevenness can start to become visible. So to compensate for that, there are backlit LED displays that use an array of LEDs to light up the LCD panel. And it uses a little bit more energy, but it creates a brighter, more evenly lit image. And then there's also direct view LED displays. So that's where each pixel is an LED package. And these displays are used to create large, seamless, high impact video walls. And at full brightness, they tend to use a little more energy than some of the other options. However, we can be creative with the content, such as using large areas of black where the LEDs are turned off. And then we can minimize that impact. So the photo on the screen that you're seeing is an installation we did for the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. And the content is made to look like the credits at the end of a movie scrolling by. And they're using direct view LED wall. So only the pixels that are showing text are illuminated. The black areas, the LEDs are off. So we still have creative, impactful content, but we're using significantly less energy than if we were to light up that entire wall. There's also organic LED or OLED displays. They use organic material that's luminescent when it's electrified. So each pixel lights up individually, similar to the direct view LED, but it requires much less power. The main drawback with those is that OLED is currently limited in brightness and size. And then in many cases, projection is still a viable option. Within that category, there are a number of different technologies with varying degree of efficiency. But really with any of these options, there are opportunities to use the content and automation to further optimize efficiency such as the example discussed earlier about turning displays on or off, or even dimming them based on proximity. And then I guess the main takeaway here is that it's really important to match the technology with the application to ensure a good user experience while still meeting your energy goals. And to Giannis's point earlier, it's best to engage with an audiovisual professional that understands these technologies and how to leverage them. And that's all for us. So thanks for your time, and I'll hand it back over to the moderators.
Great, thank you. Is Joyce still on? I don't know if we have any time for questions, if there's any questions that came to the top there.
Well, thank you so much for all the presenters, and you're very much the experts in this area. I think people had asked if this is going to be available. We're going to be working with AAM to make this recording available. Currently, I do not see any unanswered questions in the Q&A box. So I think we're going to maybe turn this over to Doug and the presenters to perhaps help us understand if a museum is intent on mounting a green exhibit. So what are some of the most important questions that one should ask first before embarking on that journey? You have talked a lot about strategies, but what should we be asking the right questions? What are they? And also, is there going to be apparent to the visitors? Are there pros and cons to making this an exhibit narrative?
I don't think that if done right, that there won't be any sacrifices that will diminish the experience for the visitors. You just need to start thinking about it at the beginning. And as you if you've designed a whole exhibit and then you have to substitute things out, then you may run into some challenges with cost and not optimal ideas. But if you start at the beginning and with these in mind and design to maybe you're going to design the whole exhibit using fabric instead of vinyl wall murals or something like that, then you can choose images that will work well with the fabric. And you can just, if you start at the beginning, then there really shouldn't be any diminished experience for the visitor. And often you can even stay within the same budget that you'd have with a non-sustainable exhibit. So it's just a different way of thinking more than something that will increase the cost and it should increase the visitor experience, improve the visitor experience. Any other thoughts from anyone else on the panel?
I'll add that from a graphic standpoint, one of the big things that needs to be thought through is the method of fastening and the method for changing the graphic in the future. And where I see people have difficulties is they'll select a material that doesn't match the life cycle of the exhibit, which I touched on, or it doesn't match their capability to change it. So I had a client that had a beautiful, very environmentally friendly donor wall built out of beautiful glass panels. The trouble is that it required having an exhibit company from a couple of hours away drive in every single time they needed to change it. So the carbon footprint of just having staff show up to lift a couple of glass panels off of the wall and do some custom hardware was incredibly burdensome for the organization. And they needed to come up with a methodology for just basically being able to change something easily. So kind of having the end life in mind, thinking about how you're going to live with the object, definitely build that in first.
And I might add that integrating the whole team in conversations early on to talk about how these goals might be met is really useful. The typical exhibition design process involves the exhibition designer and the museum taking the lead in establishing some tones of the exhibit and then starting to advance it so that the rest of the design team can kind of add our work. But if you really want to achieve a sustainable exhibit, I think that needs to be more of a dialogue, because there are critical points in, for example, in establishing what the sort of spatial context of an exhibit is, already sets in motion lighting requirements that might or might not be able to be accomplished in an low energy way. So I do think the process involves more collaboration.
Couldn't agree more, Glenn. And to your point, maybe lighting needs to, you have to dial up lighting, but maybe there are other ways that you can dial back certain aspects of the hardware of the audio-visual. I mean, we all are familiar with switchers and deployment of networks. Maybe instead of rewiring, pulling more wire, which of course has its own drawbacks, right, in terms of sustainability. Maybe we can share some type of connectivity and therefore be able to help in other ways.
I think a question you could ask at the beginning of a project, especially a renovation of an exhibit, is what opportunities do we have to repurpose existing materials? So one thing we worked with successfully was repurposing glass doors on exhibit cases and the door hardware. Those are really durable items, and we were able to repurpose those. So.
And the question about the narrative of a sustainable exhibit and how visible you think could be made to the visitors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's often a fun part of you know, there's a graphic panel or a segment of a video that just talks about the sustainable aspects of the museum exhibit design, which can also often be really interesting for museum visitors and helps, you know, frame the museum as someone who really cares about these issues.
There could be a way to also stream the data of the energy usage, that there are possibilities that way too.
And if I might add, an energy savings. What happened at the Nature Research Center in Raleigh, well, you collect rainwater, right? That it's recycled even to be used. I think, Douglas, you would have loved the architecture that went in there. The roof gardens, just so you will have a green building, and all sorts of things. I think, you know, every little bit helps. It's not, I think a one box solves all your solutions. We all have to collaborate.
I've seen some museums add their environmental statement for that specific exhibit into a credit panel that also speaks to their social position about the content. And I've seen this more and more often in museums where the content is either controversial or the content is a kind of snapshot in time, where the contents might not necessarily immediately match the viewers. So it becomes kind of an interesting way of calibrating everyone for what they're seeing as they walk in, so that the lens is the same as the lens that was intended, but it doesn't feel particularly intrusive because it doesn't continue.
Well, I see that the time is 1:05 and we apologize for the interruption in the middle, but so glad all of you could come on. This is a true representation of how the museum and the exhibit team can demonstrate collaboration. And a lot of this work would not probably be possible unless you all have started a conversation early. And we hear it loud and clear that museums and curators and other administrators could also start this conversation early at the museum, so that the collective results would be much bigger than the sum of its parts. So Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if you have any last words before we finish the session.
Sure, I would just like to thank everyone who stuck with us through our technical problems, and good luck to you as you're working to improve the sustainability of your museums and your exhibits. And thank you to all the panelists who did a lot of work to put together these presentations and have thought a lot about these issues. And so thank you. It's a pleasure to work with you in the past, and we hope we can work together a lot in the future to make better exhibits. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for all your insights. And from the Environment Climate Network, we have another additional piece of great information to share. Goodbye, till next time.